My sewing journey didn't start so easily. I had my machines, I bought those. Well, I bought one machine and I didn't know what to do after that. I didn't know how to sew. I had never grown up with my grandmother sewing or anything. I just kind of just went out, purchased the machine, and then didn't know where to go from there. But, you know, in my brain, it was like, this is gonna be easy. This ain't too hard, right? I was wrong. But the first thing that I thought to get was a pattern. Surely, if I get a pattern, it's got all the information you'll ever need about sewing, and you'll be a pro after you finish it, right? That's wrong too. so, so I got my pattern, I picked it up, I looked at it, and I was like, you know what? We're gonna have to do this another day. I can't go through the mental gymnastics of trying to figure out how to read this. So I sat it down for quite some time, and then I thought to myself, I got in holiness and I saw the need for better garments, for something a little different, more modest. And I just was like, let me try this one more time. So I went out and got a pattern that aligned with holiness, with scripture at the time. And I started to look and I started to read and I started to research on the internet and I started to make. And but it wasn't an easy task. And I hope this video helps you to understand patterns a lot more. So if that sounds like you and you're having a hard time with pattern reading, then just stay tuned to Modestly Made. Greetings, sis. It's me, Sister Joanna Wade, and thank you for joining me here on Modestly Made, where you and I can sew together. I have some information I would like to share about sewing, and I know you probably have some information that you would like to share, so share that in the comments, and we can just learn this thing together. By no means am I a professional seamstress. I don't claim to be. I've never been. I just picked up the need to sew and learned a lot of information along the way that I think may be beneficial to your sewing journey. So let's talk about patterns. All right, so let's look at a pattern. So a pattern consists of three different parts. It consists of the envelope, the instructions, and the actual pattern pieces. Number one, style and size. So when you look at the envelope, you're going to see three views or three different styles of this skirt. The mini style, the midi style, and the maxi style. Of course, in modesty, we're not wearing any mini skirts. We may get away with a midi skirt, but as long as it's about 3/4 calf. And then we have the maxi skirt, which you would see a lot of. I personally like the maxi skirt, so that's what I am going to go off once I make this garment. Now the sizes. The sizes are printed on the front of the envelope. On this one, on the side of the front, is printed. These are all the sizes that's included in the packet. So all your pattern pieces are going to have this range of size. Now, if you look at the back of the envelope, you'll see some more sizes from 20 waist to 38 waist. You do not have all those sizes. What you have is 30 through 38 waist. And there's another packet that has the 20 through 28 waist, but this is not that packet. So be careful not to confuse that. I've confused it in the past, and that is some knowledge going forward that might help you not to get it all mixed up. Number 2, materials and measurements. So on the back of the envelope, you will see the materials that they suggest that you use. The first suggestion is fabric. They want you to use denim, cotton blend, linen, and twill. Those are all non-stretch fabrics. Do not use a stretch fabric when the pattern calls for a non-stretch fabric. It just will not lay the same. It also calls for interfacing, in this case, lightweight fusible interfacing, which is a thicker kind of felt-like material that holds the structure of the garment in places that needs to retain that structure, like the waistband, the pocket flaps, things like that. It also calls for notions. Now, in this case, there is only one notion, but there could be many notions depending on your pattern. The notions that they requesting on this pattern is zipper. So for the A view, they want to see a 9-inch or 23 centimeter exposed metal zipper. And for the B and C views, it wants a 20-inch, 51 centimeter separating zipper. Notions are tools, accessories, functional items that are required to construct your garments, like buttons, threads, even needles and elastics. They all are notions. When it comes to your fabrics, and you go to the store and you buy your fabrics, you're going to see them wrapped around 1 or 2 bolts, a 45-inch bolt or a 60-inch bolt. Those are the width of the fabric. So if you have a 60-inch bolt, then you're going to not need as much fabric for your pattern, and they list it here on the back. So say we were a 49-inch waist. If we were a 49-inch waist, that means that the size that we would pick to use in this pattern is 32-inch waist or 32 waist. If you follow that row down to the skirt that you chose, in this case we chose C, you would see that you need 3.5 yards of fabric for both 45 and 60-inch bolt. But if you look at the other views for the skirt B and skirt A, you will see that you would need 2 yards of fabric for 45-inch bolt and 1.5 yards of fabric for the 60-inch bolt. That's how you determine how much yardage you need in your fabric. Now, to get your size, as far as measuring your size, you're measuring your body or your model's body, you want to measure at the waist. Now, tip for measuring at the waist is always measure at the navel and around. And then you also want to measure from the back, the top of your buttocks, down to your ankle so that you know the ankle length of the skirt that you would like. If you want it midi, then you would measure from the top of your butt in the back to mid-calf or 3/4 calf, however long you would like your midi skirt. Number 3, guides, glossaries, keys, and instruction. Now, inside of the envelope, you'll find the instructions. There are several things that are on these instructions. Mostly they're reference guides for you. So the first panel, you're going to see your views. The second panel beneath that, you're going to see each pattern piece, what it looks like, the number of the pattern piece, and the grain line, and also the name. So you can reference those as you cut and as you go along. You're also going to see your pattern markings. So your patterns have bunch of different markings. This is the glossary for you to determine what each marking means. You're also going to see adjust if necessary. So sometimes you want to shorten, sometimes you want to lengthen, and they're telling you how to do that with this particular pattern. They're different amongst the patterns, so pay close attention to that. Your cuttings and your markings are very important for you to read. It's very important for you to read the whole thing, but that section is important in preparing your garment, preparing your fabric, how to deal with or add a double thickness, how to deal with single thickness and napes and all that good stuff. So you want to read those instructions. You have a key telling you how the right side and the wrong side of the fabric is represented throughout the instructions. And then you have your layouts. So your layouts are labeled according to what you have in material and sizes that you want to cut from. So you see your skirt A with a 45-inch bolt with a nape, and then your sizes 20 through 30 is how you would lay that fabric or lay that pattern on the fabric in order to cut. It also has the other options, the 60-inch bolt with the nape, but all sizes. That's how you would lay your patterns on your fabric to cut. And the interfacing. The back of this sheet, you're gonna find the other views, the B, skirt B and skirt C, and how you should lay those on your pattern or on your fabric in order to cut your pattern pieces out. You also have some additional sewing information. Your fabric key also telling you how the fabric or what side of the fabric is represented in which way on these instructions. Your seam allowances here. Of course, you want to use a 5/8 seam. I default to a 5/8 inch seam on all my projects. So usually it is 5/8 inch seam, but it can change. So you want to make sure that your particular pattern seam allowance is your default or different. It gives you a glossary there, all these different terms you're going to hear throughout your sewing journey. And these are the definitions for each one of those terms. And I'm probably going to go over a bunch of this so that you have a good knowledge of what these terms mean and you can give them some practice and see how they're actually done. And then you move on to your sewing directions. Your skirt A, B, and C is represented in all these steps from 1 to 46 in this particular pattern. But you want to pay close attention to what steps belong to what view, because not all steps in here belong to all views. And you'll see that represented with view A and view BC on the top of the set of steps that you're looking at right now. So be careful as to not do the steps for view A if you're working on B and C and vice versa. Number 4, pattern pieces. The first thing that you want to do is decide how you want to preserve your pattern. Once you cut your pattern pieces out, you're going to see that there are several different sizes on each pattern, and they're going to be measured in different widths. So you don't want to cut out your size only, because what happens is you're going to lose all the bigger sizes. And if you have to come back to your pattern to sew another garment that is a bigger size, then you've lost all that. So you have to decide how to preserve your pattern. What I do is I cut out the whole thing. I don't cut any of the sizes out. I just fold the lines where the size that I need, and then I will either trace that on another paper, a medium, another fabric to preserve that size in its own pattern, or I would just fold it and just use that and then put it back in my envelope. The next thing I want to cover under patterns is what is the wrong side and what is the right side of the fabric. The wrong side of the fabric is the fabric that's on the inside of your clothing. The right side of the fabric is the fabric that is on the outside of your clothing. When you get your fabric, it might be a lighter shade on the other side, and that would signify that that's the wrong side. It might be, you might have a print and you can see obviously the print is on the right side of the garment and you would use the wrong side. A rule is that you always cut on the wrong side of the fabric. So when you're pinning your pieces to your fabric, you want to cut on the wrong side, unless otherwise stated. But if you cut on the right side, or you prefer to cut on the right side, then make sure that you're consistent throughout your whole project so that all the pieces matches up the way they're intended to match up. Let's talk about the grain line. What is the grain line? The grain line is represented as an arrow on all the pattern pieces, and the grain line on the fabric is represented by the lines that the fabric maker made when it was weaving that fabric. So when you weave a fabric, or they make the fabric, they weave in one direction as to not in several different directions, unless that is a fabric that does have several different directions in weaving, which I don't suppose there's a lot out there. But the grain line on the pattern needs to match your grain line on your fabric. That gives it a more uniform and consistent look and feel and stretch on your finished garment. So it's very, very important to match up your grain line to the grain line on your fabric. Markings, notches, and darts. What are markings, notches, and darts? They are all the information that you need that's on your pattern, on where the buttons will go, where the pleats are, where the fold lines are, where the center of the garment is. And you want to make sure that when you're cutting your pieces, that you transfer all the markings that's on the pattern onto your fabric. They help you match up each piece. So the notches are there where you can match up each piece so you know where along that piece edge you are sewing to another piece. So they're very, very important for you to take the time out to put every marking. Now you don't have to put the numbers, you don't have to, well, I put the numbers, but you don't have to put the sizes is what I meant. The sizes that are on there on the fabric, or the writing that's on there on the fabric, just the markings. There's dots, there's circles, there's triangles, there's lines with T's, or they look like big eyes. There's a lot of different symbols. Those you want for sure. Next, you need to decide how you would like to finish your seam before you start sewing. Your seams need to be cleaned up. So there's a couple ways you can do that. You can clean your seams up as you sew seams and make seams and sew them together. Or you can clean up your edges of your garment beforehand and then make your seams so that your edges, so you can press your seams flat and your edges are all sewn up. It just depends on the type of fabric that you choose, what seams you would want to use. And I'll go in depth in that in another video. But just make sure that you decide what you want to do with your seams. It's really hard to clean up those seams after you finish the whole entire garment. So you clean up your seams as you go along so that your seams can be folded in other seams. Like on your arm, your wrist seam, or the hem along your wrist, the seam that goes up your arm needs to be included in the seam of the hem of your wrist, if that makes any sense. But that is what you would want to do, is to decide what you want to do with your seams before you start to sew. Let's talk about some do's and don'ts. As you probably noticed, 90% of your project, your sewing project, is preparation. So your sewing is only about 10%. And so it's very important that you understand that you need to enjoy, or learn to enjoy, the preparation, because the better you prep, the better your garment. And when you get that finished garment, you're going to be so proud of yourself that you prepped and you prepped and you prepped, and the sewing was the least of your worries. You're going to mess up in sewing too, but it's not that hard to become really good at using your sewing machine. Number 2, don't be afraid of mistakes. They just make you better. So I used to make plenty of mistakes. I used to have to resew and recut and buy more fabric and buy more thread and materials just because I messed up. Don't be afraid to do that. You can always buy more fabric. It's not that expensive. A yard here, yard there extra is not going to break the bank. So don't be afraid of the mistakes. But when you do make a mistake, don't cut corners. Just pick out the thread, get that thread ripper or that seam ripper and pick out that thread and start all over. Don't try to cover it up. Don't try to cut the corners. Don't try to work around. Just pick it out and re-sew it down. It's just going to make you a better seamstress, and you won't look at your garment at the end and be like, oh man, I should have done this, I should have done that. And you will do that if you try to cover up things and try to work around things. Number 3, get a yard more of what you need. A yard more of what you need is not going to hurt you. It's going to help you, because then if you make mistakes, you have another yard. Or if you want to use this and you really like this fabric and you want to use it for another project, you have another yard. You have a swatch that you can take back to the fabric store so that you can get more of that fabric. It just helps you out along the way. Number 4, clean up and organize as you go. The worst thing that you can do is cut all these threads up. They just get scattered everywhere. They're in everything. They're on your carpet. They're on your curtains. They just get everywhere. They also can do some real damage to your vacuum, so you don't want to vacuum them up. So as you are cutting the threads when you're sewing, just have a bin next to you and put those in there. If you're cutting your fabric, have a bin, put those in there so that you don't have so much to do at the end of your project. Also, make sure that when you're pulling your pins, you're putting them back in the cushion. That's the last thing you want your little kid to step on, is a sewing pin. And you don't want to step on it either. That sucker hurts. I've done it. So don't be like me and misplace pins. Have your cushion, have your arm cushion, so that you can pull them quickly and put them in the cushion. Well, I hope that helped you in your pattern knowledge. If you have any topics that you want me to cover, or if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments. But don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Also, put on your notification bell so you know when my next video comes out. I do have a clothing store online at www.freshchristianclothing.com. You can also follow me on my socials at Fresh Christian Clothing on Instagram, Facebook, or TikTok. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I appreciate your support, and I will see you soon. Peace be.